Welcome, everyone. Today, we are at a critical inflection point. The conversation in application security is rapidly shifting from the familiar ground of web applications and APIs to a new, more autonomous frontier, generative and agentic AI. This isn't just a new feature, it's a new paradigm and it requires a new class of security thinking. To help us navigate this frontier, we have a guest who is not just observing these changes, but is actively architecting the foundational infrastructure needed to make this feature secure. Vineeth Sai is a generative AI security engineer who has operated at the absolute cutting edge of the industry. He has been instrumental in pioneering Gen AI security best practices for some of the world's most significant AI platforms, including Amazon Q and Amazon Bedrock during his time at Amazon Web Services and has recently moved to Meta. But his impact extends far beyond his corporate roles. In the open source community, Vineeth is a recognized leader working on the fundamental building blocks of AI trust. He is a project lead for the ambitious OWASP AI Vulnerability Scoring System, or AIVSS, which aims to create a standardized way to measure and communicate AI risk, much like CVSS did for traditional software. He has authored foundational research on securing the Model Context Protocol (MCP), the very mechanism that allows AI agents to interact with external tools, and has even drafted proposals for an agent named service, a sort of a DNS for AI agents. We'll discuss everything from standardizing vulnerability scoring to creating verifiable identities for AI agents and securing the very protocols they use to communicate. Please welcome Vineeth. We are so happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for the really cool, kind description of myself.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, and you've done a lot of cool work over the last year, right? We both been following kind of your work. So thanks for all the work you do, and thanks for putting all of these things out there, right? So it kind of makes it much easier for the community to learn from. So like Anshuman said, there's so much we want to talk to you about. I don't know how much we can cover in the time we have today, but we kind of want to start off with MCP, right? I think we both Anshuman and I are returning from Black Hat, and if I heard MCP one more time, I would want to like kill myself, right? So. For sure, there was a lot of talk about MCP. So for anyone who hasn't kind of heard about MCP or knows what it is, I'm sure pretty much everybody has. But if just to get everybody on the same page, MCP, think of MCP as like a plug and play standard that lets that allows like LLM powered software or AI models to call external tools without too much of custom integrations. They kind of make it very easy. It's often called the USB-C for AI. I think it's a little too simplistic of a definition, but I think it's a good start. The example which I kind of really like using MCP is in like within Cursor. So within Cursor, you can configure MCP servers, and like one of the interesting ones that my engineers in my team use is Context 7, when you can basically talk about some third party library you want to use, and Cursor often kind of may have outdated information, and you can just like say Context 7 and it'll kind of pull in the latest information, right? That's a really kind of cool example of how MCP servers work, right? So the one thing, the one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Vineeth, is that the one way I think about MCP is that it works really well is because it's so simple, right? It's such a simple, beautifully defined, simple protocol. But when I start thinking about the security of this, kind of feel like maybe it's simplistic, right? In the sense that it's maybe just too simple to be real, right? The fact that, in 2025, or 2024, we created a new protocol without thinking through authentication, without thinking through any kind of, signing, without thinking of a lot of these things, kind of seems absurd. But hey, maybe that's why it was so quick to adapt, right? And now people are thinking about security, which for security folks like the three of us feels absurd, but it works for a lot of others. So so let me take a pause here and ask you, one, do you agree kind of with that definition of MCP? Would you want to add something? And then kind of, the broader question I have is, if you're a head of application security in a company, or if you're an application security architect and you're seeing your developers go crazy with MCP, not as users per se, like using within Cursor, but actually integrating that with your applications, how should they think about security today with what's available?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with your example. One thing I like to add, and I like to think about, is MCP is like giving hands and legs to AI, right? Up until previous MCP, it was a chatbot environment. It's just you and the AI, and like almost no outside world connectivity, right? Now with MCP, you are equipping your AI with permissions to like reach out to the world, make changes in the world, mutating, non-mutating, read information. So it's basically making it from a dormant, one-on-one entity to something that can talk to the rest of the world. That's I really like thinking of MCP as of in that point of view. And to answer your second part of your question more accurately, I it's kind of hard, right? Because like MCP servers are still Indian regular servers, right? So a lot of the old, like I would say, olden days security is still crucially important, right? But it is the risk profile is we've never had a non-deterministic entity act on users' behalf, right? Up until now, we've always had like a user or like a system user or like a system identity or like a human user. We had like very defined user identities doing very deterministic actions. You knew what API calls they were allowed to make and so on. But now with the rise of non-deterministic entities, it's really hard to pre-think about every possible config change or every possible secure path, and the threat surface becomes extremely large just because of the non-determinism. um, yeah, I mean, we can let me know which part you want me to talk about in more details, but like developers that are like trying to create MCPs for their products, like like you said, thinking about auth, like right now MCP only does auth like using OAuth, but OAuth is not granular enough. We can't the scopes are just not granular enough, right? It's really hard to scope down to really granular permissions. And so that's a really big concern. We don't have signing like we've discussed previously. There's a lot of issues that are like inherently missing in the protocol. And again, like security is often looked at as a blocker. And ideally, we should not be seen as that. But it's sometimes good friction. With no friction, sometimes the wheel just doesn't move. So it's have to have some good friction. So that's where I see security coming in to help maybe moderate things a little.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to kind of like double click on that, right? So let's just take a particular example of where you have your software, you're writing software, and that software inherently communicates with other software using MCP servers, right? And then I think I mean, happy to jump into. Feel free to jump into like rug pull attacks and a bunch of the other attacks that you've written about and spoken about as well. Is that if you're writing software which is inherently communicates with other software using MCP, their MCP servers basically acts as a client. Then how do you kind of think about security? How do you think about at least either risk avoidance or even risk detection or any of those governance controls, right? So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, how are you in your entity, in your company, are you allowed to curl any URL, right? That's how I'm thinking about it, right? Like
Hmm.
it's no different than reaching out to the internet and like curling a random npm package, right? Like you can just do npx, like you can install mcp server. Like how different is that from installing any other node package or any other package? But now you need to like so like that's the baseline that I see it as, like, hey, you still have to follow the traditional security, like make sure you're
Mhm.
installing verified servers. How, like, where are you getting the binary for the like for the mcp server?
Yeah.
Like even the client, do you trust the client? If you're using cursor and stuff, I'm sure you trust it, but there are other clients out there that you don't know how the client, because the client is bridging the gap between everything, right? So if the client is compromised on your actual host, then that's an issue as well, right? So there's the traditional security is still really important. The part where you need to think about more is, hey, like now that I'm giving AI access to perform like actions on my behalf, or like right now, I don't know about you guys, I don't know any company that has created an mcp specific identity. Everywhere I see it's,
Hmm.
oh, let's use my identity to take actions on my behalf using mcp. So now that, think about that, right? Like now you can, your performance data, your salary information, all of that is like those credentials are being used to, like, as part of the MCP auth protocol, right? So like how we don't have a way to create a subset version of our own credentials. Now without that,
Hmm.
how would you like really protect, what the LLM is going to do? Because we have a threat surface on the LLM side, prompt injection, line, like another issue that we've discussed in MCP, like line jumping attack or rug pull attacks. There's a lot of attacks there, but it's this the core, the predefined security controls are still somewhat fuzzy right now, I would say.
If I can jump into that, right? So I think you spoke about identity, right? And I think identity is a problem generally in this agentic AI world. It's not specifically related to MCP, right? Like agents, they could use MCP to sort of augment their capabilities, or they don't have to use MCP. Agents can communicate with other agents as well, right? And I think the identity problem still applies to those kind of use cases as well. So, I think one thing you mentioned that kind of struck a chord with me was, in this sort of world where we're still not sure how the identity would work, these agents and these sort of MC protocols, they essentially work on behalf of humans, right? So they are kind of, I think this is an open-ended question, at least that I haven't seen a good answer for. Is should these sort of interactions between agents or between MCP clients and servers, should they assume the identity of the human who's kind of operating, or so like you mentioned, or would it make sense to come up with a new identity for the protocol itself? Like how are you thinking about that landscape?
I mean, I don't think there'll be one right answer, right? I think the worst is fully assuming the identity of the human. I think that's you can get worse than that, right? Because like I said, like now if the AI, if someone can like prompt inject the LM to like get it your bank routing details, because you have access to your Workday bank routing, right? So like now if there's an MCP server for Workday, like what is preventing it from like getting access to your account information, routing number for your like direct deposit, right? So the I think the next logical step is to create a subset of your permissions. Like I don't know many enterprises that have that feature where like my corporate identity has all of X permissions, and I would like to I would like to delegate a subset of X to this invocation. And that can be dynamic, right? It doesn't have to be fully static. You can be like, hey, I'm like asking to create a calendar invite or blah blah blah. And in that case, you only provide those permissions, like more like JIT credentials, right? Just in time credentials. So we can it's a spectrum from like full like impersonation of user identity to like a fully scoped down just in time credential that is only alive for that execution call and then dies. So there's a full spectrum. Again, implementation is also very complex, a full spectrum of it. So I don't know if there's a right answer. It's all about striking a balance. We also don't want to slow down developers and slow down adoption. So it's a really hard balance. It depends on the use case. So,
Yeah.
and in terms of like having system identities, I think I the way I think about it is if you're doing something that is like scheduled or recurring over a long period of time, it's good to have a system identity because you can track it and it's constant. But like I would like to like have a time scope user identities to like no more than 48 hours. Right? You might start a job, might take some
Right.
time, but like things that say like, oh, every week I want you to like send a report, it's better to have like a system identity. That's how I see the world. Again, different use cases, different companies, is different ways to do it. But
Yeah.
I don't I like time scoping user identities.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right? I mean, at least for me, I see a lot of similarities to kind of when kind of the iPhone launched. And this is almost like the iPhone, but before the App Store moment, or like Android before Google Play Store became so popular, right? Is essentially that there are two things I want to pull on, right? So one is on kind of like how do you trust a particular server, right? And today, I mean, the reality is there's no way you kind of trust the company which publishes the MCP server, but the reality is that the coolest ones, at least at the beginning, will always be small startups which kind of build out MCP servers because they're the ones who are very quick at using these new technologies, right? So at this point, there's just no way to know. There's no kind of like Play Store. There's no kind of like marketplace for for good MCP servers. And the reality is, I don't even as I say it, I'm like, oh my god, am I really proposing that there be only one or two marketplaces and then we concentrate all innovation into one place? That also sounds like a dumb idea. So you're right. So I think in many ways we don't have the right answer, but the marketplace model definitely solved some of the identity issues. Well, not identity issues, but at least the identity of the publisher, etc. Right. So that's one point. On the second part about scope edit permissions also, right? I kind of feel like the mobile ecosystem has done a better job than, let's say, like a GitHub Actions ecosystem, where the permissions you get can be fine-grained, right? So when I install an app, I can give access only to my the app has access to my Android account and me as a person, but in reality, it does not have access to my location all the time. You can kind of get fine-grained right there, right? So I kind of feel like the mobile ecosystem has kind of done a better job at this. It's a different story because in the mobile, you have a user always using it and clicking buttons. So obviously, can't be 100% apples to apple comparison. But I think there is precedent for saying, hey, you don't always get all the permissions. You get only a subset of it. But again, I think you're able to enforce those on Android and iOS because there are only two platforms. There's Android and there's iOS, right? So as long as you solve it as long as like Google and Apple solve it, you're good to go. But that's not going to happen with MCP, given how freakishly democratized it is, I guess, in some ways.
No, I fully agree with you, and I think like you hit a really good point about like, you need you like even with, on Chrome browser, like when I
Hmm.
was using this platform, it said, "Hey, do you want to give permission to your
Yeah.
microphone?" And yeah, so I think eventually we'll get to human in the loop system where we start doing that. I don't know if you guys use the Auth0 MCP server on Cursor. You can choose the scopes you want to like give permission
Hmm.
to. So that's the next step that's happening. So like now I know Amazon has CEDAR permissions that can go even more fine-grained, and like there's other like Open Policy Agent, and there's a few other companies that are doing this. There's a company called Permit.io that's being backed by Cisco's agency framework that tries to do something similar. So like really fine-grained that you can define to the action level. So I mean, we are going in the direction. It's just in the meantime, we are seeing so many hacks
Yeah.
happen. So it's just yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just to kind of round off on that, right? I mean, again, not to put you on the spot here, but is this a better way of doing it than having like two giants kind of like innovating and then building a secure platform? Because the way I think about it is that while all of the innovation on security seems to be happening almost outside the protocol, right, right, it doesn't seem to be like a lot of these things. Maybe it's better to build this into the protocol, so there's no wrong way of using it. Like, in application security, we talk about like secure by default and stuff like that. This really looks like the default is super bad, and then the complete onus is on the user to kind of make it secure, which is a recipe for disaster, right?
No, I fully agree with you. So like that's why like the ETDI thing I worked on, we
Mm-hmm.
tried to merge it into the base protocol. Again, the thing is like Anthropic has a really tight grip on the protocol, and they are very careful about what they let merge in. But I agree with you. Like making the path of least resistance the most secure one will always be better, right? Like if you make the secure one the hard way, most often or not, people will make a mistake. So shift left or all of the the fancy terms we've been using, like best case is it all goes into the protocol itself. But then if the protocol is not fast enough and we're seeing hacks, we have to in the short time patch things. And that's where like Trail of Bits, like
Mm-hmm.
Keith and Cliff came out with a really cool tool called Context Protector. And then like Manish, I worked and Idan worked on the ETDI. Both of them solve the same problem, but one
Mm-hmm.
is externally and one is into the protocol itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, even with ETDI, you hit the nail on the head, right? If it's not part of the protocol, now if I'm like publishing my server, now I have to think about saying, hey, do I publish it with the ETDI guardrails that you guys have mentioned, or do I do the bare, plain vanilla? Because look, I run a business in the end, right? So I need people to use my MCP protocol, MCP server. So even if I say I'm adopting the ETDI controls, even if I'm implementing the signing, it adds a little bit of extra cost on the client, and if they're not willing to bear that cost, then I lose business. So I kind of feel like publishers are right now in like a catch 22. Even the ones who know about it and who want to do the right thing may not choose to do the right thing,
Yeah.
right? On the other hand, you're right. If you kind of build a tool to kind of, again, I kind of feel like we've completely offloaded security to the user, which which is kind of, what, this 30 years of we've had this lesson that we should not be doing that, but somehow in the 2024 protocol we kind of still did the same thing anyway. Sorry, Anshuman, you were saying something.
Yeah, I have two follow-ups. Well, first of all, I think for our listeners, Vineeth, can you sort of explain what ETDI is? Because I myself, I was just kind of trying to read up on it, right? And it looks like for all the MCP specific attacks, you are proposing some security controls. But if you don't mind going into a little bit more details about what ETDI is, what is it supposed to solve, I think that will be helpful.
Yeah, so ETDI is basically stands for Enhanced Tool Definition Interface. So I can walk you through a couple attack scenarios and then we'll talk about how ETDI helps with that. So like one of the most common attacks that we've seen on the Vulnerable MCP Hub, Vulnerable MCP project were what happens if the tool like the tool provider changes the tool definition. Because like so the way it works is the LLM looks at the tool definition and says, okay, this tool does X, Y, and Z, and I can call this tool to do X, Y, and Z. So that's what the LLM sees, right? So when the tool is created and published, let's say it has, this tool adds two numbers. That's the initial definition. But let's say a bad actor later on changes the tool after you've like fully like set it up and everything, changes the tool from hey, this this adds two numbers and sends your credentials to this location or something along those lines, right? So this is called a rug pull attack, where you're like basically you're pulling the rug after someone stands on it, right? And so in this case, what we did, what ETDI does is this: the initial auth, when you set up the auth, when you like authenticate, authorize, we use the JWS signing to create a hash of the tool definition based upon on your initial auth claim bearer token, right? And so now any change to the tool definition will now result in a mismatch, and then we'll ask you to re-authenticate again to the new tool definition. So basically, this prevents the rug pull attack. So anytime there's a change in the tool definition, you'll have to re-auth, and then that way you can like re-verify the what the tool definition is. So that's one attack, which what ETDI helps to protect. The second one is line jumping attack, and then there's a third one called stack protection. I'll talk about both of them concurrently. So the other one is, let's say you have like, again, like how often are you deleting apps on your phone that you don't use, that people keep like installing apps and forgetting to delete them? I mean, something similar has happened to MCP, right? Like, let's say you have multiple MCP servers with the same name and same tool name as well, right? Now, one of them is malicious, one of them is good. How would your LLM choose? It's almost randomized at that point, right? So now, like, how would like that way you can now, like, instead of making calls to the secure or the right MCP server, you now make calls to the wrong one, and you can do a lot of things, and then that leads into a lot more like attacks down the line. So you could, in the bad MCP server tool definition, what if you can prompt inject the LLM if you're not using the frontier model that has all of the protections, and you have your own small language model that you use internally in your enterprise that can get prompt injected and do things it's not supposed to. And especially if you have mutating permissions, it can really cause havoc, right? So that's the line jumping attack. So what ETDI does here is, it because the ETDI is also, the majority of the changes in the ETDI are in the client. Because the client is the one that reaches out to the various MCP servers. So we really beefed up the client. So it always prioritizes, you can, again, customizable. It always prioritizes auth verified servers. So it doesn't reach out to non-authenticated MCP servers. And then it gives priority to ETDI MCP servers over non-ETDI MCP servers. And there's a priority order. And what the client also does is, you can set on the server side, you can set, hey, you can only call this API 4 times within a certain amount of limit, or you can only call this after this other thing has been called. So it has to be in a stack way. Because sometimes you might have to read some data and then write some data, right? And then sometimes what happens is, like, let's say if you're like, there's some prompt injection, the LLM tries to read as too much data, so you can prevent that. And it also, if it's trying to make mutating actions or like write a bunch of gibberish to a database, it can prevent that too, because you're like scoping down how many calls, what order of the calls sequence, and all of that right into the client itself. So these are some of the things that ETDI does. Yeah, Manish, Idan, and I, like, Manish is the main brains behind this. So the three of us really worked on building this into the client itself.
Got it. As a follow-up to the uh, line jumping attack, I believe. So you mentioned, the client, you've built certain controls in a way that the client can only communicate with verified servers, right? And there's a priority order, so on and so forth. Uh, how does that work? Like, if I am a bad actor and if I sort of host a MCP server with some malicious payloads, is there a way that I can also get it verified? And like, how does a client know which one to trust and how to trust? Just kind
Yeah,
of curious.
the client doesn't know. So the client checks, hey, is this auth, like, have you already authenticated the server, right? Because you have to authenticate, like, the probability that you'll authenticate into like a malicious server is lower than non-malicious, like than an open server that has no auth at all. So the client really doesn't know which is a good server or a bad server. We thought about it. We thought about using public key, private key, and like creating a full PKI system and basing it off the basic like standard PKI system. But the problem was delivering certificates. Like our Chrome browser is preloaded with a bunch of certificates, right? So now you have to distribute a client with preloaded certificates, and now that goes back to we're going to start relying on like the PKI network. And we thought about this initially. We wanted to come out with the most easy to adopt situation, so that's why we came with just OAuth and just if you've authored to the server, then it's a quote unquote safe server. That's the idea we came with. But again, this is
Right.
extendable. You can use public private key certificates. You can preload the client with, hey, like in an enterprise, this is super easy to do, right? In the enterprise, you can say, hey, you can only connect to MCP servers that are signed with this certificate, and you can have the check in the client. So like now you can only connect to internal MCP servers, for example, and not to
Mhm.
external MCP servers. So it's a possibility in the enterprise world, but not so much in the open world.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And then the other question I had was going back to your example of different companies exposing their MCP servers like Workday and all of these. So I think as enterprise security teams, right? If our users, uh, if our employees wanna start implementing these sort of MCP servers that are available on the internet, and if they don't have the right security controls in terms of the granular scopes and all of that stuff, what can enterprise security teams do in order to reduce the blast radius and the risk, right? Because if there are no controls on the MCP servers themselves, is there anything that we can do from a client side or from the host side, the MCP host side?
So we can. It's hard because like again, you can have like terminal only MCP servers. Right now, now like at this point, it's no longer like AI security. It's back to like asset management, and it's back to like, oh, can you
DLP
where
and
can
stuff.
you yeah, where can you like call a call request from? Which can you pip from the
Uh,
public pip, or do you have an internal pip repo? So like those are like standard like core enterprise security rather than MCP
got it.
security, but it's the same concept, right? Because again, you're just installing a bunch of code. Question is, where is this code coming from? And are you allowed to
Yeah.
connect to the server? Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think the
look, sorry,
go
just to
ahead.
wrap up that point, right? I mean, this exact problem happened most recently when GitHub Actions opened up, and you could call like external actions. It was the exact same thing. The only advantage there was a large organization called GitHub whose reputation was at stake when you
So
used a malicious GitHub action, and they had an incentive to kind of bring up a verified badge and so on and so forth. So at least you could have some basic sense. Otherwise, it's just the same thing from a curl request to installing a mobile app to GitHub actions, external actions. It's kind of the same damn thing. And in the end, it's going to come down to monitoring of some kind,
Observability. Yeah, yeah,
observability of some kind, and then like a published service of some kind, and then like a trusted identity of some kind. But it's just going to
yeah.
be the impact is in this case is it's just growing too fast, too quickly, and without any guardrails that make it scarier, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Yeah.
one sort of approach or one strategy that I've sort of seen and I've heard from other peers is building some kind of a gateway, right? Like an MCP gateway, where you essentially act as a proxy between all the requests going from your MCP client, whether that is a cursor, ID to the MCP server. Now, I'm sure you've sort of heard this sort of a proxy or like a MCP gateway approach. Do you see this as a short, medium term sort of mitigation, or do you think the proxy approach can actually be something that can be implemented long term to protect against like some of these more MCP inherent risk?
I mean, I think eventually the hyperscalers will create MCP as a service. It's just a matter of time. And then
Uh,
what is MCP as a service is just a proxy layer. It's pretty much an API gateway fronted MCP server, right? And at that point, you can add all of your standard security stuff to the API gateway itself, and there's no difference from like an MCP gateway and an API server fronting an MCP server, right? So I mean, there is definitely it's bound to happen. A lot of enterprises won't have the resources to host their own servers and manage it, and so they'll again, just like how everything has become serverless, I'm sure there'll be serverless MCP eventually. You just have to throw in a spec. Your hyperscaler will do everything for you and will do the auth for you, do everything like, and then yeah, I mean, it's bound to happen. I'm sure it's already happening. I've seen a few of them already. And didn't Microsoft just say they're going to create MCP as a service in Azure soon? So yeah, it's just a matter of time. Again, there's no right answer as long as you're getting
yeah.
the security in, and then following best practices. And it depends on how large the organization is, what risk tolerance they have, and so on.
Yeah, got it. Um, and then one last question before we can move on is, so with respect to ETDI, right? Like, how is that adoption looking like? Like, have you heard about companies adopting it, sort of using that approach, or is it still kind of in the proposal stage where you're kind of working with Anthropic? Like, help us understand what is the future of ETDI.
So yeah, right now, so we have a working Python SDK and we modified everything is working. We've opened this PR on the spec. We've just not been moving as fast as we'd like. And then we've had a few like trail of bits like built the context protector similar to ETDI just because Anthropic was moving so slow. So they could build you think of it as a sidecar situation. So ETDI inherently, I mean, you can use it right now as it is. The only problem is the clients have to be ETDI enabled, right? That's the
Mm.
hardest part. So now the major client controllers are like Cursor or like like Windsor for when you are installing like MCP locally on your terminal, you could install the ETDI client from the repo and use it. But what ETDI best did was bring about the um, like public awareness, and now there's a
Yeah.
bunch of other companies trying to build into that, and we have actually spoken to a few people from Anthropic to try to see if they can like integrate these, and so those conversations are happening. But yeah, that's the ETDI. Though it works, adoption hasn't been great just because of like you said, everyone has customers, and in the end, you still have to like get it to work. So that's been the slow part of it.
Yeah. On that note, just want to kind of like quickly plug vulnerablemcp.info. I mean, I know that's a site you maintain as well, Vineeth. Like just the any listeners thinking wanting to learn more about security of MCP, I think it's a fantastic resource. A lot of really cool blogs on a roll of all. I mean it's external blogs written by other people as well, but just gives you a really good sense of kind of all the security aspects of MCP. And I know you're talking about ETDI there as well. So yeah, so good luck with the adoption for ETDI. But like you said, even if ETDI doesn't get adopted, but the ideas permeate into other
Yeah,
areas, you've done your job, right?
I'm happy. Yeah, I'm more
Yeah,
than happy.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Any other questions about MCP, Sandesh?
I can talk forever, but I know we have other things to talk about, so let's move on.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, Vineeth, I mean, we've seen your work about around some other areas as well. I think let's maybe spend a few minutes on AIVSS, or how like what's sort of give us a high level understanding of what that project is about. What is it catered to help, and how can others help you in that basically.
Yeah, so AIVSS was a brainchild of Ken Huang. He like initially like was trying to rate vulnerabilities from like with AI specific, and it became really hard because of the non-determinism, right? Like it's really hard to have a non-deterministic like entity as part of your like outside of like a threat actor, internal and external. It's hard to have that like non-deterministic entity, and so AIVSS was born for the as not as a replacement to CVSS. We CVSS is our core base. We just add it as a top. Like so, you know how for a lot of vulnerabilities you have a CVSS 3 score and a CVSS 4 score. Like what we see happening is we'll have a CVSS score and an AIVSS score if it has AI attached to it. So even if you don't understand AIVSS, you can somewhat get the concept with the CVSS score, but AIVSS score. We worked with DARPA, we worked with NIST, we worked with a lot of government like CISA to basically create a unified taxonomy across all the government, corporate, private to ensure that we all speak the same language, right? Like we've like for traditional security, we took us some time, but we now have almost the same vocabulary to like explain risk and talk about how do you like contain risk, and we have the same terminology, but with AI being so new and moving so fast, we like bug bounty is like HackerOne was having a lot of issues. Like, hey, how do we like rate these? Like, with this how much money to give out and so on. So like creating this unified taxonomy and scoring system will make it really easy for everyone to adopt and make it simpler, just because like again security should not be a blocker. So like that's my mantra usually,
Hmm.
because I've always been seen as a blocker at work and I didn't really like it. So
Yeah.
that's the goal there. Yeah.
Yeah, so that this is actually very interesting because CVSS itself has been very controversial over the years, right? Like, I have tried to use CVSS in different places I've worked at to score uh, vulnerabilities, right? And what I find, like at least from my experience, it's very like subjective based on who is rating that, and also kind of how much that person understands about the infrastructure, right? So, are I mean, do you anticipate similar problems with AIVSS where the scoring will be like subjective, but the idea is to have some kind of framework at least where you can speak in the same terminology with like a different company who might be using AIVSS. So is that the intent behind it, or is the intent to really just focus on the AI related aspects? So to give
Yeah,
an
it's
example, yeah,
yeah,
go
it's
ahead.
it's 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 both for sure, right? Because w- um like even though CVSS is controversial, like I can't think of another way like
Yeah,
to like explain a risk to two different entities that share like don't share much. I think I'm sure there's more frameworks out there, and people love their own frameworks, but I can't think of another better way to do it. Even though it's flawed, it's the best we have. And
mm,
risk inherently subjective. There is
yes,
no objective risk. It's always, hey, like it all depends on, and like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, risk is in the eye of the beholder. Like you like how like each person has a different risk tolerance, each enterprise has a different risk tolerance, and so it really and like I don't think the controversial nature of CVSS has made it any less popular. People are still using it. It's still chugging along. We
yeah,
have new versions coming out. So I see AIVSS to be the same thing. Its goal, like I said, is to have unified taxonomy and also for everyone to have a unified framework that at least we can discuss. And then always, let's say for your own company, you can modify it to how you see fit. But like when
mm,
you come outside, you'll know exactly what everybody's talking about, at least in the same ballpark.
right, right. And is the idea that if your company is using any sort of AI workflows, or like how do you decide when to use AIVSS basically?
Yeah, I mean, if you have AI in any of your workflows, you can use AIVS. It's like again,
Okay.
it's just CVSs with a bunch. What we did to at a high level is we created like a top 10-ish. You can think about top risks. We're going again. OWASP is coming out with the official top 10 for AI agents soon. So we like once they come out, we'll probably coalesce everything into one. But for now,
Uh,
we came out with like the top 10 risks that we thought about, and then based upon that, we have multipliers like, and then we have some sort scoring system. So if anyone's interested, we just launched the V version 0.5 just to get like RFC requests for comments. If anyone's interested, feel free to give comments to us and pressure test this. So if you do have AI in your systems and you're seeing vulnerabilities or you want to do like threat modeling and you want to have a more objective way to threat model, feel free to use this, give us feedback, and we'd love to like adopt this and in other places and then get more feedback basically.
got it. Yeah. And we will provide all the links and everything else in the show notes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always reminded of like a quote when I hear those things that all frameworks are wrong, but some are useful, right? So I kind of feel like CVSS and AIVSS also kind of falls into the same category where there is definitely a lot wrong with CVSS, especially if you're like in a hardcore AppSec space, because it just gets too complicated to communicate to developers. But if you want to have like security, at least different parts of security to talk to each other, you're right. CVSS is probably the only thing is the best bad thing we have, or the least worst thing we have today. And then shout out to kind of helping out with AIVSS as well.
Yeah. Moving on. Vineeth, you gave a talk at B-Sides Harrisburg, titled SafeGen, Accelerating Secure Generative AI Implementation. What is the number one piece of actionable advice you give to development teams that is being pressured by the business to just integrate an LLM into their product today?
So that talk came out of the exact same question you asked. When I was an AppSec there at AWS, like, hey, like we had to integrate AI like Bedrock and Q into non-AI services. I did became, and I was asked to create our developer guidance on like, hey, what are the minimum things that need to come out so we can not block you guys, but also like launch to the public. So like, how do I put this? I guess the top three things to take away from that is like it's like very simple security, like least permissions. Like, hey, if your AI doesn't need to access code, don't give it a code interpreter. If your AI doesn't need to access the internet, don't give it internet access. Just making sure you scope down your model as much as possible. So the biggest things was input and output out filtering, because that's where prompt injection mostly happens. Prompt
Hmm,
injection in my head is not a threat. It's a feature of the service. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It just doesn't know who's telling it to do, right? So if
hmm.
I don't see a world where like we can fully prevent prompt injection, because it's very hard for the AI system to know who exactly it is. Maybe one day we can like reduce it to a point where it becomes like XSS, not as often. But yeah, so input output filtering, that's the first thing I remember telling and writing in our developer guidance documents there. The second one is the scoping down. If your like model or agent doesn't need some permission, to not just don't give it to it. Start off with like zero permissions, like a pure chatbot, and then add permissions as you go rather than decreasing it. And the third one is auth. Um, at AWS, we had our own IAM auth systems, so we had some control over it. So the things that I said was mostly using like a proxy. So we had an API gateway fronting calls to Bedrock. So we did input filtering at API gateway. We did all of the auth at the API layer before we even reached LLM. Before a call even touched the LLM, all of the auth pre happened. And so then at that point, we could use verified permissions or anything else to like gate access to the model, and anything the model is trained upon, your user should already have access to. So if your model is using a RAG, like you must assume that whoever is accessing the model has all access to the data that the model is trained upon, because it's possible for anyone to get any data that the model is trained upon with just enough time, right? So those are the few things I remember writing down and talking about in that talk.
Got it. Yeah, like if I think about it, they are very basic security principles. If you think about it,
Yep.
like making sure input output is validated, filtered, making sure you have at least privilege access, access control, authentication. So, yeah, I think this kind of just validates that even with AI, sort of being introduced in workflows and automation, whatnot, some of the security fundamentals still apply. It's not like you're building new systems,
Yep.
right? So, yeah, that's good to know. Um, cool. Sandesh, did you have any follow up for that before I move on?
No, move on. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So the next question I have for you, Vineeth, was so your IETF draft for the agent name search relies on PKI, right? Given the historical challenges with PKI, costly certificate authorities, slow revocation in the web ecosystem, what new approaches or safeguards does ANS propose to avoid, creating a similar bottleneck or single point of failure for the entire AI ecosystem? And before you can answer that question, can you also kind of describe what ANS is? What was it
Mhm.
supposed to address?
Yeah, so initially in the beginning of this call, you said, AI agents are now able to talk to each other and they don't have to use MCP, right? So now, once
Mm,
AI agents can start talking to each other, now one discovery of this agent was going to be a big issue, right?
mm,
You have an A2A agent, you have IBM's ACP, you have Cisco's Agent D, and you have these various frameworks. But how do you discover agents, right? Google has the well-known card, but then how do you find these? And so the goal for ANS was, hey, like let's create a directory service similar to DNS or based upon DNS that resolves an ANS URL to an endpoint that the agent is hosted on, right? And then once the
mm,
agents know each other, they can like all of the protocol binding, all of the auths handle, within the same protocol itself. But then we realize, hey, like we don't know which protocol will be the winner 5, 10 years from now. So we don't want to like keeping that in mind. Let's make this initially protocol agnostic and create it and make a ecosystem, right? So you have the core ANS architecture and you have adapters. You have an A2A adapter. You have an ACP adapter. And so, our initial when we were writing the paper and testing it out, our goal was, hey, like if we can create an adaptive system where in A2A agent can talk to an ACP agent and so on, it would really make, it would really make like the agent protocol irrelevant, and it all depends upon the skills of the agent, what the agent can do, and other intrinsic characteristics of the agent. So that was our
mm,
initial thought process. Much harder than
mm,
it is to actually implement it. So the initial implementation and the spec that we released was um, all A2A agents are able to like find each other. ACP is able to find each other. I mean, you can find like other agents can find each other, but the actual like handshake and negotiation happens outside of the ANS. And again, like, we wanted to be similar to websites where we didn't want to gate who can register and who could not register, right? Because you have to build trust. If someone says, "Hey, I will choose which website can be registered," like people are less likely to use it. We wanted to be as open ecosystem as possible. So the IETF draft basically says, hey, like this is built like DNS, builds on off PKI. Although PKI has a ton of issues, we couldn't think of any other way to like vend certificates and create an identity, because agent identity is not yet defined. We don't have an identity
Yeah,
for agent. And
that's true.
the current best one is certificates, unfortunately. We built CRL, like a certificate revocation list, into ANS, so ANS can
Hmm.
like can revoke stuff, and things that we thought that the PKI infrastructure was missing, we try to build it into ourselves. But yeah, it's a hard problem to solve. I did present it at IETF Madrid this in last about a month ago or so. There's been a lot of like interest in adoption. Human Security is a bot prevention company. They've
Hmm.
implemented a version of this that they are using to like gate which bots, which agents are allowed to access the websites of their customers that they're protecting, right? And MIT's Nanda has come out with their decentralized registry that basically is built upon ANS. So there's a few different ways this can be implemented. The way we wrote the paper was not to say, hey, this is the only right way. We just wanted to
Hmm.
put the idea out, put a spec out, have a POC out, and then I'm sure over time it'll evolve, and we wanted the community to like help move it along for us.
Yeah, yeah. And have you also thought about applying the same concept of on MCP servers, right? So the fact that you can discover agents using
Yeah.
ANS, like could the same concept be also
Oh
applied
yes.
in
So if you see
discovering
the
MCPs?
paper, yeah. So if you
Yeah.
see the paper right now, we allow four. So the URL is like how we have https://
Hmm.
www.domain dot whatever TLD, top level domain, right? So we do the same thing. So you have our initial, like the agent URLs would look like either A2A, ACP, or MCP
Mm,
:/ you have
interesting.
the agent identity, agent name, right? If the agent like capability, we wanted a capability to be a top level identifier, right? So because like you can have an agent name, like agent, let's say agent X, but it can do summarization, it can do math, like let's say it's a Wolfgram Alpha agent, right? It can do a few different things. And so we wanted to have the agent capability at top level on the URL itself. So you know exactly what the agent name is and what the agent does. And then we had the entity that's sponsoring the agent. So like .acme, so it can be Google, Microsoft, whatever, right? And then we had a dot optional, which can be version v1, v2, v3, or HIPAA. Like let's say it's a HIPAA compliant, or like FERPA, FedRAMP. We had an optional one, and that's the URL we created. And so MCPs could be discovered as well. And yeah, the current architecture allows for an MCP being registered and agents being registered.
Awesome. Yeah, this is fascinating. I'm curious, like, what would be a best way for everybody to sort of work with you or work with the team and kind of help in solving these interesting challenges that I think is only gonna get more sort of it's only gonna get bigger and bigger, right? As enterprise
Right.
start adopting MCP and whatnot. So, is there a website? Is there a resource that you would recommend people reach out?
Yeah, I mean, like I work a lot through OWASP, and it's probably the largest open source community.
Yeah.
So I'm super active in OWASP. You can reach out to me on my LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on my website vineethsai.com, on OWASP, on Slack, or anywhere for that matter. Like again, like most of the research I do is open source. I've never done any closed work research outside of work. So
Hmm.
so yeah, I love helping the community, and like for example, ETDI didn't get into the protocol, but it moved it along in the right direction. And all I care about is getting the right security in, and it's
Hmm.
just for the love of the game at this point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man.
No,
I Go
yeah.
ahead.
No. Go
No,
ahead.
no, go
Finish your
ahead.
thought.
No, I was just gonna say. I think, yeah, like I hear a lot of people who are graduating from the colleges and was struggling to find jobs because
Mm,
the market is very competitive right now. And this is one piece of advice I give to everybody is get involved in like some of these OAS initiatives that are focused more on solving these interesting problems that are going to happen sooner than later.
mhm.
So yeah, I think OASP Slack is also where I am there and I sort of work with others. So yeah, if anybody's listening and if you want some uh, resources, ideas of how to get started, I think OASP Slack is great. And then Vineeth also mentioned his website, so feel free to reach out to him.
Yeah. I think every time there's a new technology, I kind of feel like security is kind of getting closer and closer to becoming faster to catch up, right? And I think I kind of really like how the the openness of the whole this AI generation is happening. There's no one winner, there's no two or three winners, and I think it complicates security in the short term. But I'm really hoping that in the long term, protocols like MCP, even though I kind of complain about how it's so free for all, is that eventually the free for all nature is what will lead to kind of more and more security thoughts, and like more better ideas coming through and actually getting pushed through. So I'm kind of like optimistic about like AI security in many ways, and I think it's partly because we need people like you are kind of taking so much time and effort to do it. So yeah, so more power to you. Thanks for all the work you do, and yeah, I hope more people join your mission and many other good people who are trying to secure this crazy technology that we're going through.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for doing the podcast. This is really good, like way to disseminate information,
Yeah.
and like information is power. So hopefully, someone hears this and like helps contributes and creates a new cool idea.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome, Vineeth. Again, it was wonderful having you. I think some of the things we discussed here were very cutting edge greenfield. So I was personally very I learned quite a bit today. So yeah, please continue doing the good work, and we hope to catch you again soon. Thank you so
Mhm.
much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you for joining us. If you like the show, please share this with your friends and colleagues. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach Anshuman on Twitter at Anshuman_BH. That's ANSHUMAN_BH. And me, Sandesh, at Juba on Jeans. That's JUBBAONJEANS. See you next time.